fans. It is your boy, Kevin Phillip Fox. I'm here for the Waiver Wire NFL podcast. No Brian McFadden tonight, as you all know. He's got to take the young one trick-or-treating. Parenthood, am I right? Lucky for me, my trick-or-treating doesn't start for another couple hours. So I'm here in this Halloween edition, and I'm actually in my Halloween costume right now. Comment in the chat if you know what it is. If anybody gets it right, they get 5 legit points. They earn some credibility towards being a better legit follower. We have Armand Mosin in the chat, Takedo Luna, Joey Crack. All the goats of legit football are in the chat right now. And the Waiver Wire podcast, as anybody knows, is a tight, condensed podcast. We're very, very excited to be bringing you these. I have Joe of Legit Football, the head. We have our very own founder, co-founder. We have our collaborated upon list. So without further ado, drum roll, please. Joe, Takedo, Armand. We have a guest in the chat. It is not Matthew Perry, actually. Rest in paradise, King. That one hurt. Number 1 on our Waiver Wire top 10 list is Cardinals tight end Trey McBride. He had a 20-point outburst for fantasy football last week. We saw Josh Dobbs get traded to the Vikings today. Very, very interesting stuff, people. But this means that we have Kyler Murray back in the saddle in Arizona, which should be nothing but good for the tight end Trey McBride. Armand asks, are you someone from Jurassic Park? No, sir. Keep guessing. Yeah, a lot of crazy stuff at the trade deadline. You're going to have to check in on the Fantasy Q&A show. This episode is strictly about the waiver wire. Trey McBride, now that Zach Ertz is on injured reserve, he's a smash pickup. Smash play, really, if you get him. But an absolute outburst in week 8. Joe asks, is Kyler official? I believe he's very close to official given the fact that Josh Dobbs was traded to the Vikings today. So it's either going to be Clayton Tune or Josh Dobbs. It will be Kyler when he's ready, as Armand has stated in the chat. Week 9, the Cardinals play the Browns. So maybe you might want to have a 1-week exception on Trey McBride there because the Browns are they're a really good defense. And if Clayton Tune is still starting, Kyler's still adjusting at that point, I might pivot there. Number 2, we have Jahan Dodson, wide receiver for the Washington Commanders, which how on God's green earth is he even eligible for this list? I'm not quite sure. But after a slow start to the season, Dodson is beginning to emerge as a true playmaker in Washington. The 2022 first rounder reeled in 8 of 10 targets for 108 yards and a touchdown in week 8. He's seen a combined 18 targets over the past 2 weeks, so the usage is on the rise. He was already a candidate to be heavily utilized at the beginning of the season. It hasn't really materialized that way. Personally, if you're like myself, I kind of foresee Jacoby Brissett taking over this job sooner than later. So I think at that point, it would be a very, very appropriate time to look Jahan Dodson's way because I think Brissett will hyper target Dodson being such a good receiver, good separator. McLaurin's always going to get his, don't worry. But in the chat, it sounds like Joe is disappointed he didn't take Brian McFadden's advice last week and stick with Sam Howell. Takedo asks about Donovan Peoples-Jones. We'll talk about him a little bit at the end of the show. Number 3, he's already been talked about during this episode, and he's a player who could be a league winner if you get him right now. But he's only 55% rostered still, and I'm talking about Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray. Murray seems to be tracking for a week 10 return, so it does appear that week 9 will be Clayton Tune still, as Armand had stated. Over the last 3 seasons, however, he ranks 5th among NFL quarterbacks with 18.6 fantasy points per game, behind only Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson. That is elite company. 18.6 points. I don't know about y'all, but I could take that a week right now, given what I've been dealing with at QB this season. So get your Kyler Murrays. Not a great matchup next week, and he probably won't be healthy anyway. So once again, kind of like Trey McBride, have a contingency plan in place for the next one. But right around the bend is Kyler Murray's league winning stretch. Number 4 is a name that I actually tend to bring up more commonly than McFadden even, and that is Titans running back Tyjae Spears, who's 49% rostered. He only had 7 fantasy points last week, but he's totaled at least 58 scrimmage yards in 3 of his last 4 games and is averaging over 7.5 yards per touch during that span. Look, Derrick Henry didn't get traded today, so we can put the Derrick Henry stuff to bed. But Tyjae Spears has standalone value, independent of Derrick Henry's status, and league-winning upside if Derrick Henry goes down. He's, in my opinion, a tier above a handcuff. I look at him more as a potential to weekly throw in your flex dart throw play if you are a little dicey at running back. You could sure as hell do a lot worse than Tyjae Spears. Number 5. Seahawks running back Zach Charbonnet. Ken Walker was questionable going into the game. He did end up playing, which kind of really did hurt Charbonnet's status as like a play. So we're looking at a 7-point game from him last week, and he was electric in his opportunities. 53 yards on just 5 carries. We knew this when he was drafted. Everybody was hoping he'd go to an area where there was a workhorse void. But that being said, if Kenneth Walker ever does have to miss time, given that he is battling a calf injury, Zach Charbonnet has Zach Charbonnet has RB1 upside. Sorry about that tongue twister there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, he does play the Ravens next week. They do have a historically good defense, and Ken Walker is still in the mix. I still like keeping Charbonnet on the bench, but I don't know if you need to start right away. I'd look elsewhere. Number 6 on our list is a guy that I've always absolutely loved, and his name is Rashid Shaheed, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. I've always loved his talent. He is just a good bet for a touchdown every week, a long touchdown at that. He has a 25-yard plus reception in 5 of 8 games. His explosive speed makes him a high upside fantasy play, despite an inconsistent target share. He's kind of the cream of the crop when it comes to those deep threat wide receiver threes, like those boom or bust wide receiver threes. Rashid Shaheed right now, given that number of 5 of 8 games, he has an explosive play. I really like Rashid Shaheed for that reason in our number 6 spot. Only 36% rostered, 23 points last week. Like I said with Spears, any given week, if you need to throw a dart at a board and you just need a warm body at the wide receiver position, Rashid Shaheed, you could always do worse. Moving right along, the number 7 name is a name I'm excited to bring up because I was so high on this guy pre-draft, and I got laughed at quite a lot, actually. And then on draft night, a lot of people victory lapped on me. I'm talking about Will Levis. I'm talking about Titans quarterback. He threw for 238 yards and 4 tuds in his NFL debut. He's 4% rostered, ladies and gentlemen. Joe, I saw you say that you have vultures in your league. Something tells me Will Levis is probably available. And given that you're struggling so much at the QB position, that's your guy right there. Will Levis threw for 238 and 4 in his debut. He clearly has franchise quarterback talent. It remains to be seen whether or not he'll put it together on a week in and week out basis, but you sure as hell could do a lot worse given that we've been starting the likes of Sam Howell, Jordan Love, Tyson Bagent. I don't know about y'all, but I did have to throw Bagent out there in a couple games, and it wasn't very fun. Levis does have a tougher matchup this week at the Steelers, so keep your expectations in check. I will always throw a comment on when somebody gives me my flowers. Joe Crack is giving me credit for believing in Derek Carr. Yeah, I mean, he's not always going to be pretty. He's had his bad games this season, but he's kind of like, to me, he's a better version of Jimmy G. He's pretty consistent. You kind of know what you're going to get. Jimmy G looks over the hill. He looks washed. Oh my goodness, he ruined a lot of people's nights last night. Number 8 on our waiver wire priority list, I'm looking at wide receiver Quentin Johnston for the LA Chargers. And Quentin Johnston finally got himself a little target share there. 6 targets. Had a little mini breakthrough in week 8 with 7.5 half PPR points. The rookie first rounder has the talent to emerge in the second half of the season. Josh Palmer missed some time in that game. Keenan Allen, unfortunately, does have a history of being injured. We already know about the tragedy that is Mike Williams on IR. So Quentin Johnston, definitely a sneaky ad at this point of the season. I think you could do a lot worse than Quentin Johnston in terms of a dart throw, in terms of somebody to just throw on the bottom of your bench. I really like Quentin Johnston. Plays the Jets this week. All these guys that we're mentioning today do have tough matchups this week. So cross your fingers, say a prayer if you do end up having to start any of these guys, but I think they're all very worthy of the pickup. Next up, we have wide receiver Marvin Mims. This is our number 9 waiver wire priority. He plays for the Denver Broncos, and he's 16% rostered. He has been very, very quiet over the last month, which has kind of really hurt his stock as like a fantasy sleeper. Mims, when he has played, though, when he has seen his time increase, he's averaging 22.4 yards per catch, which is damn impressive. And it's only a matter of time before he has a bigger target share, given the just dismay and dislike of Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton from that quarterback, from those coaches. You know, the amount of smoke surrounding a trade from them, it didn't end up materializing, but it does kind of tell you where they stand on those receivers. So I think Marvin Mims probably has some definite upside if you can get your hands on him in fantasy football at this stage of the game. Last but not least on our Waiver Wire podcast, we're keeping it short and sweet tonight because it's Halloween. We want to get everybody out to their trick-or-treating. We want to get everybody out to their parties. My party is super chill, you know, charcuterie board, my little costume that nobody's guessed yet. Come on. I got my coffee, my cold brew coffee from the Palm. Best coffee spot in LA. Last but not least, we have Logan Thomas, tight end for the Washington Commanders. Thomas ranks as the tight end 11 this season and has 14 combined targets over the last 2 weeks. He's not particularly exciting. If you've seen Thomas play, you know what I'm talking about. He's a former Bill, so I happen to know him pretty well. Also a former quarterback, so he's kind of got a unique story. Okay, Joe got it. We finally have somebody in the chat who got the costume. A lot of credit to you, Joey Craig. We appreciate you. I got to show you. I'll do a stand-up. I'll do a twirl. I'll show you guys the whole fit before I leave. But I am indeed Banjo from the beloved 90s video game Banjo-Kazooie. Proud of you, Joe, for sniping that. That's a king right there. So anyways, Thomas, not particularly exciting per se, but very reliable. 13.4 fantasy points. He keeps doing this. He keeps exploding. In the fantasy football tight end landscape, you could chase points, which is what I've been caught doing this year. Throw a guy in after they have 12 points 1 week, they have 1 point. Then you throw somebody else in, and then that person has their goose week, and then the person you just threw out of the lineup, you know, has another explosion. So it's kind of like when you're looking for somebody, like when you're like out in public and you're like, oh, I'm here. And then they go there and then they go there and you're like, I'm here now. Where are you? And they're like, I just went over here. And you're like, okay, if I tell you where I'm going to be, you stay there and then I'll come to you and so that's kind of like what it's like chasing points from fantasy tight ends. Stay where you're at. You know what I mean? If you got a good thing at home, don't ruin it. So next up, yeah, the tight end, Joe relates to the tight end struggle. He plays the Patriots next week, and I'm inclined to think that he could have a good game. You know, the Patriots, they're a little leakier than they have the reputation of being. I will never, ever be able to stomach the fact that my contending Bills lost to Mac Jones and that atrocious dumpster fire of a team, but it happened, and credit where it's due. But Logan Thomas could be a great play this week. In the chat, we had some discussion about Donovan Peoples-Jones. Personally, for me, I would like to see it happen before I threw him in my lineup, given they still have, he was traded to the Lions today, that we still have players like Jameson Williams, players like Josh Reynolds ahead of him, and Amon-Ra St. Brown's not going anywhere. Sam Laporta is very frequently targeted. I don't think it's worth the risk personally. But I mean, like we talked about on the show, you could always do worse than a flyer, a guy with talent. So credit where it's due. DPJ has had some good, career games, had some good moments in his career. So you could do a lot worse. But I wouldn't expect anything, especially not right away. I'd want to see it a couple weeks before I started to trust it. And Joe Crack reminds me of Khalif Raymond. Yeah, how could I forget? He is a dog as well. That concludes our Waiver Wire podcast. Short and sweet. Only one list today. We don't have Brian. Safe trick-or-treating for him and his family. Safe trick-or-treating to all of you out there. Safe Halloween parties if you're out there doing your Halloween stuff. Like I said, I got my charcuterie board and my cold brew. It is a bit late for a cold brew. I might wake up in a cold sweat at 2 a.m., but that's the risks you take as a caffeine addict. It beats the alternative. I'll say that much. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. It looks like Joe's got one more question before we wrap up the podcast. I do want to show some love to Armand, to Takedo, everybody who pops into the Waiver Wire podcast. We love you. We appreciate you. Thanks for being here. Hope I could hold it down. I don't do solo pods too often, so I really hope that I held it down for you guys. I had a really good time. And Joe's question is waiver related. So, I'm not as strict as Brian on the whole. It has to only be waiver related. Don't tell him I said that. And he's definitely busy trick-or-treating, so I think I can get away with it. But we have one last question from Joey Crack before we move on, and that is Jamison Crowder or Jaden Reed of the Packers. I'm a huge Jaden Reed fan, man. I love the talent so much. I know it's not a dynasty league. I know Joe only plays redraft. But I think Jaden Reed is just too talented and too worth the stash. He could be a second half league winner. Christian Watson just never impresses me anymore. I'm just a bit done with him, to be completely honest with you. And it's really sad because I have him as a wide receiver in some of my dynasty leagues. But I think Jaden Reed has a lot of potential. With the stipulation if Curtis Samuel is out, it makes me like Crowder a little bit more. Crowder did have a nice little game last week. He had some good catches in garbage time. He had a touchdown, I believe. But not enough for me to want to drop Jaden Reed for him. Maybe start, yes, like if you can keep both. And he wants to know Baker over Levis. I like Levis, man. I like the upside. I like the talent. He's just got too much potential, man. I wouldn't. But also Baker is kind of like, he's had a good season. Let's check Baker's matchup really quick before we decide this. I don't want to be hasty here. Baker Mayfield plays. Checking Tampa Bay's schedule right now. Joe, if you have it in the chat, throw me a comment. But it looks like Baker Mayfield plays the Texans, which can be a good matchup for quarterbacks. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough call. I think I'd go with Levis just because I think upside is higher. We kind of know what we're getting with Baker at this point in the season and at this point in his career. So before I go, as promised, let me just refocus my camera. Hold on one second. Did it refocus? It's not having a great day. That's okay. This is my Banjo-Kazooie outfit. I got the yellow shorts. I got the blue backpack. I got the saber-tooth necklace. Appreciate everybody for listening to the Waiver Wire show of Legit Football. And ladies and gentlemen, we are out.